Hello and welcome to another episode of the Homebrew Pub, the only pub in existence where every beer on tap is made by a homebrewer. And on this ethereal plane, the Homebrew Pub will turn into the guest brewer's perfect brew pub. So please come in, grab a stool, and grab a pint. And this week in the Homebrew Pub, the only pub in existence where every tap is a beer made by a homebrewer, we are welcoming Matt Jaggers.
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm from Jaggers Brewing Co. YouTube channel, and I'm here with my awesome friend here, Andrew.
How you doing today?
Man, I'm great. I'm sitting here enjoying one of my Berlinerweissens. This is version 4. I feel like I really hit the nail on the head here on this one.
Nice.
It took me a couple tries, but I think I finally got it figured out.
It's so crazy. I'm excited to talk to you about that Berlinerweisse later, but it's so crazy when you get that recipe and the first time you brew it, you love it, but you know there's something off about, not off, but like something you want to change, and so you just keep going for it and going for it and going for it.
I've been trying to work on those, like, the house type recipes to have here on hand for friends and even just myself, to have around here and enjoy. And, sometimes it gets frustrating. You have some of those bad ones or the ones that you just can't figure out. And then you knock one out and you're like, oh my God, did I just make that, And this is kind of one of those ones for me.
And Berlinerweisse is not an easy beer to make.
Well, I took the cheaters route a little bit and did a kettle sour,
Okay.
The way that everybody else has kind of been doing lately.
Mm-hmm.
I do have plans on doing souring, for fermentation on a Berliner. I think that would be exciting. I've got a couple cool projects. I don't want to give them away yet, because I want to see how they end up. But it's kind of crazy though. Like, even though I hit version 4, I was like, okay, how far can I push this?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of my videos, this beer actually, I took the yeast and I repitched on it twice.
Mm-hmm.
But I also took the lacto from the second beer that I made and repitched it into the third beer. And so I've got a beer floating around here that is third generation fermented with yeast and second kettle soured with lacto. And so, like, I had never seen anybody do that before. I'm sure people have tried, but I never saw anything like that. So I was like, well, let's see what happens,
That's incredible. I've never done anything close to that. I've never harvested yeast, let alone lacto. So I just think that's incredible.
Man, it was nuts. I get all these crazy ideas in my head, like, so we filmed something and then, like, I'm sitting there editing and I'm like, why didn't I try this? What? Oh my God, that's a good question. We should totally do that. We should try that. And then it just spawns into this ridiculousness sometimes. Mm-hmm. Like, we mapped up all of 2020's content for the channel back October of 21. We sat down and we said, okay, we're doing this, and this, 2022. And so after doing that, getting all my videos planned out and, like, my brew date set and like, oh, I've got to have these ingredients by then and there. I've come up with like 17 other things that I'm going to try to slip in during 2022. And so it gets a little tight sometimes, I'm sure you as a content creator too,
Mm-hmm.
some of those editing things, man, they come down to the last little bit there. And you're like, man, I don't know if I'm going to make this deadline, that I've set for myself. And I mean, the deadline's the deadline. How important that is to you is individually independent of everybody else, but it helps hold us accountable for what we're trying to do.
So on your channel, Jaggers Brewing Company, you are focusing really on education. So each episode is a different beer with, like, a different style, a different tactic. I mean, how do you, before we get into your approach to brewing, how do you approach your channel?
So for the channel, I'm really brewing what I find interesting. 3-4 years ago, I had already been home brewing for a little bit, but I was primarily a stout and Hefeweizen kind of guy.
Hmm.
The occasional lager, light lager, whatever kind of deal, but primarily Hefeweizen and stouts were what I brewed.
Hmm.
And I would play with those, adding fruit or whatever, extract kits. And then I finally switched over to all grain brewing and kind of took some stabs at some blonde ales and things like that. And so probably about 2 years ago, I was like, okay, so we walk in the beer aisle at a store, and there's just so many choices out there. Let's see what some of these other styles are about. So I attempted a few other ones, and really, it wasn't until I joined the Homebrew Club in 2021. They had kind of like an introductory competition type of deal where a newer or lower experienced brewer gets paired up with a more experienced brewer,
Hmm.
and then they assign two contests that year, and Belgian ales for the first round, and then German
Oh, wow.
for the second. And so the gentleman that I got paired up with, Jonathan, he and we had about the same years in brewing for the most part. He definitely had probably more brews under his belt, and he had a more diverse brewing experience than I had. Because you brew extract kits for 3 years, you're not really a whole lot of experience. You probably had the basics downs of taking your readings
Hmm.
and know when things are done and bottling or kegging or whatever. But we talked about it, and we figured out what we were going to brew and stuff. But man, I had never had a Belgian beer before,
Yeah.
and so I was like, okay, so we're gonna brew this thing, and we're gonna try to turn that one in together. But now I have a whole bunch of subcategories that I know nothing about, never have had.
Yeah.
I'm gonna brew these things and figure out what they're about. So like I brewed a saison, which is
Mm.
the first saison that I had, and of course, like if you go back and you look at my channel, I got a video, is homebrewing expensive? Yeah, it's expensive because like if you've never had this style before, you can go buy a bunch of examples.
Hmm.
I went, I
I
I'm
have never
scared.
thought about it like that. That is so
I'm
true.
I'm so scared to even put the number on how many Trappist ales I went
Yeah.
through to figure out what a double tastes like.
Yeah.
And quads. And so I did a saison, I did a Berliner, I did a double, I did a quad, and then I did a few other ones.
Hmm.
And so I was putting together my recipe for my double, and my brew partner, I had him look it over, and I was like, what are you thinking about this? Does this malt kind of match? And is this way too complicated? Because it was. That should be like my family motto, like nothing simple or something like that. But he's like, Matt, uh, you can take the yeast from your double, and it'll kick off and ferment a quad very well.
Mm.
So I was like, oh, great, Jonathan. Now I got to put together a quad recipe.
And the hangovers are
And,
so much worse.
oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, so yeah, that thing, so that was my first. The quad was my first stuck mash. So I had a bunch of growing up to do last year
Hmm.
through brewing some of this stuff, and so I'm still trying to figure it out, all the way. But I've gotten a lot better at it, and I kind of am able to look at what some other people are doing and help guide them too. And so
Yeah.
that's been cool. We ended up winning the local homebrew club competition within there together. Uh,
Congratulations.
Thank you. We were able to pick up some points by entering some competitions here in the state,
Hmm.
and so that was fun. He won like 19 or 20 medals
Oh,
last year.
wow.
Now I was like, okay, I'm only gonna get my feet barely wet into this deal, and
Yeah.
so like I had entered two competitions, I think it was, and I submitted two beers in each one. One was a prickly pear Berliner, and then the other one was my double. And
Nice.
both of them didn't do that great, but I feel like for a first time entrant, they hit the 30
Oh, that's
low 30s.
solid.
Yeah, low 30s, mid 30s, I believe, if I remember correctly. So that was exciting. And so this year's goal, I sat down and I said, I'm going to put in at least two beers in every competition that comes up within our circuit. So the first competition, I've got three beers in. Second competition, I have five. And then the third competition coming up, it's looking like I'm probably going to put in about six, maybe seven.
Wow.
So I'm blowing that out of the water, but I'm anxiously nervous waiting these results on some of these things.
Hmm.
So that's going to be fun to see if this Berliner here does well or not.
Yeah.
I might think that it's the best thing ever, but we'll see what the judges say.
Yeah. Because I mean, I once entered a competition, and I don't enter that many competitions because the way I brew and approach brewing, a lot of my beers have to go into the experimental category,
Yeah,
which is great and fine, and like the feedback is always really awesome to get and respectable. But when you're in experimental, I found it's such a crapshoot
yeah,
of if this judge doesn't like the adjunct that I've used, it doesn't
yeah,
necessarily mean it's a bad beer. It just means that judge's gonna not really go for it. But I will say, entering competitions, certainly earlier in my brewing journey, was a really great way to kind of learn, even with those weird adjuncts. Like, okay, maybe I don't use that brand of tea. Maybe I switch over to this one, or they're picking up this. And that feedback is so invaluable.
yeah. I'm hoping for some good feedback. I hope that I'm doing things right. Of course, you share things with people, and maybe they don't know a whole lot of beer, like I didn't know a whole lot of beer, and they're like, oh yeah, this is good, and that you definitely like that kind of feedback, but it's
Hmm.
not terribly helpful. And so like sometimes I rely pretty heavily on my homebrew crew at the club level.
Yeah.
um, but two, sometimes you just share stuff with people and they're like, well, it's not Coors. And like, yeah, we don't live in the Rocky Mountains and I don't have the Colorado River next to
Yeah.
me. So,
Which is where I live, so, I do have that.
right. Yeah. No, I saw that. I figured you'd appreciate the joke.
Yeah, no, I think the best compliment you can get is when you give a certain beer, or like the beer you've made, to friends who aren't brewers,
Yeah.
and they ask you to make it again. That to me is when I know I've cracked a recipe, because sometimes when you give it to your other homebrew friends,
Yeah.
they want to pick it apart, which again,
Yeah.
great, and I want that feedback. But if I've got like, my three friends over there again, well, could you make that jelly donut beer again?
Yeah.
That to me is like, all right, I am not changing that, because if they like it, it means it's good. So when you are brewing a beer, what is your approach? Like when you're trying to formulate a recipe, when you're thinking about the process for that recipe, because believe it or not, different beers do better with different processes. I mean, I think every
Right.
brewer gets the basics down, but I've got a friend who swears by decoction mash. Like, I
Right.
don't do decoction. I do the single step infusion. That's just
Yeah.
what my jam is. But he will only do that for certain type of beers. Like, how do you think about the beer? Like, how do you approach that?
A lot of people would approach it differently depending on their setup, their kettle or
Hmm.
whatever. Me being an all grain brewer, I do brew in a bag.
Hmm.
So I have what I feel is the advantage of having only one vessel to worry about. Having done that, and now I do have additional equipment to do some different things.
Hmm.
As far as recipes and techniques that I start adding, if there's something that's unfamiliar to me, like I did a Marzen during our German part of the challenge last year in the club. That's not what we turned in, but I've had a lot of friends say, we need a good fest beer or whatever. It's like, okay, let me try my hand at it. So, I was like, well, I could decoct it. I've done a few decoctions, but
Should
this
we?
is going to be my first lager. And so I wanted to focus on my yeast pitch on that and the ability to ferment at a lower temperature and actually lager it instead of the decoction, because I didn't want to add too many complications at one time to one, a style that I had never brewed before, and then two, a different way of brewing, you know.
And should we explain what decoction mashing is?
Sure. So decoction mash is you're going to pull out a percentage of your mash, and you're going to put it in a different pot or a different vessel, and generally you bring it up to a boil for a certain amount of time, and then you're going to add that back slowly into the mash to be able to bring all those like Maillard reactions and those more complicated sugars and kind of big maltier taste into the mash. You know, you have the single, the double, the triple. I'm sure you can go as many times as you want to, but every time you do it, you make it a little bit darker. But you from my experience, and I've only done it about 3 times, once with another brewer and then like twice independently. The thing that I learned is you really have to watch your mash temperature every time that you add that little scoop, because you don't want to go full bore and dump all that in. Then you might end up mashing out, you know. Decoction mash was one of those processes that I was like, oh man, I don't think I'll ever do that, you know. Like that looks a little worrisome, but
It's
you know,
very labor intensive.
It is. I'll get to a funny story about a decoction mash here in just a moment. But kind of getting back to the recipe side of things, you know, so I try to approach it from that way. It's like, okay, is this familiar with me? Is this going to require any crazy techniques or anything that I'm not familiar with? And then I try to look and see, you know, one, is it a BJCP style? You know, what are the hints? What are they trying to tell us that it should taste like, smell like, look like, all that? And then kind of start filling in some of what I believe the blanks are. And then, you know, I might go and look at other recipes that are available online and kind of try to figure out what the common denominators are. You know, like if everybody's using Pilsner malt for something, then there's probably a good reason that that's being used, you know. You know, and then most of the time I try to add or err on the side of the simplest, the best way to do it. There have been a few recipes that got away from me, and we'll talk about a decoction mash. So most of the time, I do try to do the single infusion like you do. You know, once I'm done with my grains, I'm able to pull my bag up, and then, you know, my grains go to my chickens, or I try to take some and dry them out and reuse them for other things around here. I took another stab at the double. It didn't score that great. Kind of hurt my feelings when I turned it in. So the biggest complaint from these judges was like not complex enough, and so I was like, I'll show you complex.
I was gonna say, define complex.
Right, yeah. So like an idiot, I took so many like crazy steps for this thing. I did a decoction mash, which you can do. It's not in the style, you know. It's not a German lager or anything like that, you know. So a decoction mash doesn't really belong there.
No.
But I did it, you know. I don't regret it. well, that thing, it's almost time to see what that thing tastes like.
Yeah.
And then to bring in some of more complexity, so I stole some yeast from Trappist monks out of their bottles.
How dare you?
Yeah. I caught a little flack for that in some circles, but you know,
I'm sure they're forgiving people.
Yeah. I sure hope so. You know, but I kind of got a loose video about that, about when I did that. Like, if you go back and you look at some of these videos, there's some hints of what's going on in the background. That was fun to build up that yeast starter and pitch that.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I mean, just to an earlier point, so decoction mashing is generally associated with doing lagers. It's a very traditional German way
Yeah.
of brewing, and yeah, a friend, as I said, a friend of mine just absolutely believes in it. But I know there are days he was like, "Nah, I'm tired," and just will do
But
a single infusion mash.
but what's traditional though too? Like
Yeah.
there's I did a raw ale not that long ago,
Hmm.
and that was the first one that I did. And of course, I hit all the usual suspects on YouTube and
Hmm.
blog forums and all that. And um, you know, I there's so many different ways that you can do it, and so many different things that you can do to it. I do feel like it's like the, I guess, quote unquote original farmhouse ale.
Yeah.
And I ended up using Quake on it.
Hmm.
Now I don't have it. I collect some rainwater here on our quote unquote homestead, but I was
Hmm.
like, I'm not using that water. Like that seems a little sketch. But I used RO water, but I didn't add any salts, which was the first brew that I didn't manipulate the ions,
Mm.
in the water profile. And I was just like, okay, like this is one thing that changing to RO water from tap water is a huge benefit for homebrewers.
Yeah.
And then the next step up is to manipulate your water profile through water salts.
Hmm.
And that's another thing that you got to look at when building a recipe is you know to really nail that style. I feel like you really have to nail that profile.
Hmm.
There's no sense in trying to have some kind of balanced or multi water profile when you're trying to shoot for a dry, yellow type beer.
Yeah.
You'll have too much of that clash.
Hmm.
Um, but so that raw ale was kind of cool because you don't boil, and how do you add the hops, and how do you do this, how do you do that, and so I ended up doing a hot tea for it, pretty much bringing it to mash out temperature, and then pulled my grain bag with the spent hops in there, and
Hmm.
off to the chickens it went.
That's great. So I mean, you are really, whereas a lot of homebrewers, myself included, would be, I found my process, I've got a recipe, I'm gonna do what I know. I mean, I only did for the first time the other day my first step mash. Never done one before, but I was got equipment that I'm able to, which is going to have an impact on the beer. But when you're looking
Yeah.
at a recipe and the style, you're really going to that process standpoint as well, and just being like, all right, if I'm going to do this, I now need to become an expert in ancient German technique or Swedish farmhouse technique. The most
Yeah.
beautiful thing about the pub that we currently sit in, the homebrew pub,
Yeah.
is that every tap is made by a homebrewer.
Yeah.
And so, what is the beer you're going to be adding to the homebrew pub that our patrons can come and enjoy?
So that oh my god beer, I just brewed that. I think that's got to be this version 4 of my Berliner.
Yeah.
I think, like I said, I think I finally hit it out of the park with this thing. Um, the first couple attempts that I did, I ended up, I was using the wrong malts. I wasn't paying attention when I went to the
You
homebrew
were using
store.
two row instead of pilsner.
Right? Yeah, yeah. Well, no. The mix up was instead of wheat malt, I put a little bit of flake in there. I
Mm.
spaced out when I was gathering up, and then I was just like, well, that that was that was a mistake, and how much did that really contribute to it being different? I kind of feel like almost a lot. Like this is a night and day difference between the
Yeah.
first three that I brewed versus this one. And then the lacto, using the White Labs lacto. Originally, I used the Omega one. The Omega one is a wonderful lacto.
Hmm.
I think it tastes wonderful. But there's just something about the White Labs one. It soured quicker. From what I've seen thus far, it got ready like
Hmm.
just way quicker. Like I almost missed my target. I mean, I did miss my target a little bit on the pH drop.
Hmm.
Um, but I barely missed it, and I was like, okay, I got to move this thing and get going, you know.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that I do that is semi controversial is I no chill. I've caught a lot of flack for that, but it is what it is.
So when you say you no chill, you're literally just putting the wort straight into the fermenter, or what does that mean?
No, no. So at flame out,
Mm-hmm.
my lid goes on the kettle, and then I give it a little bit outside
Mm-hmm.
to drop in temperature, and then I bring it inside, put some towels and stuff down on the surface that I'm fixing to put my kettle down on, and then I just walk away. And when it's pitching temperature, it's pitching temperature.
I mean, that's how I started. I would have to drag my 5 gallons of liquid into the house, and I would
Yeah.
put it in an ice bath and just like let it sit for like 3 to 4. Like we would go and watch a movie
Yeah.
and have dinner, and then come back and like,
Yeah.
oh, time to put the yeast in.
Yep.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, no chill brewing is actually very popular in Australia, where they have very
Yep.
strict water laws.
Yep.
So, what about this Berlinerweisse, though? Like, flavor and everything, what makes it like, you're like, oh, I cracked it?
I think a combination of the lacto,
Mm-hmm.
and then the Wyeast German ale,
Mm-hmm.
the yeast. I think that really kind of took it in the right direction. Before I played around with, I can't even remember what the first yeast was that I used, but in my original YouTube video, it's actually there,
Mm-hmm.
and I used Sundew for a version of the Berliner, and that was an interesting beer. And then, man, I cannot remember what the first yeast was that I used, but it was probably White Labs.
Yeah.
I'm a pretty big proponent of theirs.
Yeah.
I buy a lot of theirs in Omegas, but I was just like, everybody was telling me like, you really should try this Wyeast German ale,
Mm-hmm.
and I did. And I think, like I said, the combination between that and the lacto really woke this recipe up and got it to where it needed to be, in my opinion.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to having that on tap here at the Homebrew Pub, and the recipe for that is actually going to be in our show notes, which Matt very kindly provided.
I hope plenty of people enjoy it. It was fun to brew. Like I said, I had gotten 3 or 4 efforts in on a Berliner before this one. One was with my brew partner,
Mm-hmm.
and I did 3 individually here. But I'm a proponent too of taking those few extra steps. I don't know if you use Whirlfloc tablets or
I do.
Yeast Nutrient. I think both of those also help.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of funny to see people's opinions on those.
Yeah. We're an opinionated bunch, homebrewers.
We are.
It's kind of annoying.
It is. Sometimes I'll hand out some advice online or to someone, and then you'll get somebody else that chime in, and someone else is like, well, what's the real story? And my
Yeah.
reply is always, if you want 5 different opinions, ask 2 different homebrewers.
Absolutely. So then, what is the beer we're not adding to the tap house? Like, what is the beer that you made and you're like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Never again.
Well, so there's 2, and it was a complete toss up of which one I was gonna do. So I'll just do both of them.
Sure.
And the next one is the Berliner version 5.
Mm-hmm.
With that one, I fruited it. I was like, all right, yeah, this beer's awesome. Let's throw some fruit on it. Let's see what happens. And doing kettle sours and playing with any bacteria really in your brewery is always a toss up. But I try to keep a pretty clean and sanitary regiment with my fermenters and
Mm-hmm.
everything else. And that's why I kettle sour majority of the time with these Berliners and things like that. I try to kettle sour when I can, because that's one less way to get an infection. And so this fruit infected the beer in secondary. It wrecked it. Yeah, there's some pretty depressing pictures on my Instagram. And I was just like, well, first, so I started seeing the pellicle, and I was like, okay, well, this pH is low enough, and it's got alcohol in it, so it probably isn't anything that's gonna be detrimental, you know. And so kept watching the pellicle grow, and then I pulled the airlock up uh, uh, after the first week, and it smelled wonderful. And I was like, all right, it's Brett, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. All right, so I ruined a fermenter, but I got Brett, you
Yeah.
know? All right, you know, this is going to add an extra twang to this. And then bottling day, I was telling my wife, I was like, man, something just does not taste right with this. And luckily, I had the smarts to go get a different bottling bucket to put this in. And I was like, man, something just doesn't taste right. I don't understand what it is. You know, maybe that bread is a little funky. And so generally, because I bottle condition, I don't taste anything until it's been set up for about a month.
Yeah.
I've just learned that that's the prime time to let things kind of meld together, good carbonation. And so I popped that top, and it smelled terrible.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, I know what this is. And so I poured the glass, I smelled it, and then I tasted it, and I was like, I am not drinking any more of this beer ever. It turned to vinegar. That acetobacter got me, and it wrecked it. And I was so defeated during that. Like, I was telling everybody, I was like, man, I'm so bummed out. And they're like, it's just a 5-gallon batch of beer. And I was
Doesn't
like,
matter.
no, yeah. I was like, so I dumped that out, man. I walked around the property. I was dumping it on ant piles. So that was the first. That was the probably the biggest defeat personally that I had. That was the second batch that I've ever had to pour down the sink or whatever. The other one is the first time that I ever brewed a Kentucky Common. There was a YouTube video that I watched, and I guess it was during the very kickoff of the resurgence of the style. And I couldn't find a lot of the ingredients. And this was before I started going to local homebrew stores, and I didn't even know that was a thing. And so I did a lot of readjusting, and it took this recipe totally whack. I mean, this thing was awful. It tasted like drinking sand. It was all gritty. It was nasty, and I was like, okay, well, this has got to go too, you know. So that was the first one that I ever did, and that was pretty early in my home brewing career. So, you know, looking back, I try to make sure that I don't repeat those mistakes.
Yeah. So, you know, we're sitting in the Mystical Homebrew Pub. Your Berlinerweisse is on tap. What is the name of the homebrew pub at this very moment, and what is the atmosphere? What is your perfect homebrew pub if you were to open one?
So it's kind of funny that you mentioned that. My wife and I, we were talking, you know, a little bit before you and I started talking about coming on the show. And you know, she said because I've really latched onto that, like, saison, farmhouse, brown ale, Berliner kind of style, and we have a what we consider a homestead here with the chickens and the fruit trees and the big gardens and all that. I think we would call it the feed store.
I like that.
Yeah, it's got that like kind of country appeal, very laid back kind of deal, you know, where everybody comes together to shake hands and drink a beer.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Well, if you're listening, we're currently sitting in the feed store. We're drinking a lovely Berlinerweisse. So come and join us.
Please do.
Matt, this has been absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for visiting us here in the Homebrew Pub. And everyone go and check out your YouTube videos on Jaggers Brewing Company on YouTube. There's a lot of great information there.
It's Jaggers Brewing Co. at the end. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I see CO. I say company.
Yeah. No problem. Please come by. I've got some pretty cool videos on there. Thank you so much, Andrew. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on here and share my trials and tribulations, my recipe, and talk to another homebrewer.
Absolutely. And if you want to brew the Berlinerweisse, again, go check out our show notes. I want to thank Matt for coming on. Do go and check out his YouTube channel, Jaggers Brewing Co. There's a lot of great information on there. And the recipe for the beer that Matt added to the tap list is actually in the show notes. So if you want to take a chance at brewing that Berlinerweisse, everything you should need is there. And of course, thank you so much for listening. If you could leave us a 5-star review wherever it is you get your podcast, that'll just help other people find the show. If you want to reach out to us, possibly come on and share a pint with me, you can reach us at our website, thehomebrewpub.com, or email landlord@thehomebrewpub.com, or on social at thehomebrewpub on Instagram and Twitter. And if, like me, you hate those annoying ads, well, we've got to keep the lights on here at the Homebrew Pub somehow, so consider joining our Patreon and becoming a Mug Club member. For $3 a month, you'll get access to ad-free versions of the episodes. But until then, grab your favorite pint, put your feet up, relax, don't worry, and have a homebrew. Till next time, cheers.